I'm a radio guy. I'm not a PhD in anything. I talk for a living. But even I know an attorney general of a state has to be a lawyer. That's what they are. In the case of an attorney general, they're the top lawyer in the state. They represent the state. They defend the state, right? Evidently, Keith Ellison missed the memo because his law license expired in 2012, and he wants to be your attorney general. Can you believe that? Minnesota, if I were you, I would run so far from the idea of Keith Ellison running a popcorn stand, let alone the attorney general's office, without a law license. There is one actual lawyer on the ballot in this race, the Republican candidate for attorney general, Doug Wardlow, who joins us now to talk a little bit about this. Doug, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
You can't make this up. So he surrendered his law license in 2012. Is he explaining how he's going to get it back before November?
Well, yes, that's what he did. He has not explained how he's going to get it back. I mean, maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know. The fact of the matter is he hasn't been licensed to practice law in Minnesota since 2012. And he isn't currently licensed to practice law in Minnesota, and you really need a law license to be the attorney general. You need to be able to go into court. You need to be able to have other attorneys go into court in your name. You can't do those things unless you have a law license. So I think he'd have to make up a number of continuing legal education classes and probably pay some amount of money to the Lawyer Professional Responsibility Board or the Registration Board to get his law license back and get it reactivated. But the fact of the matter is he hasn't had a license to practice law for 6 years, and that means that he's just not a serious attorney. And I don't think the people of Minnesota want someone who's not a serious attorney as their attorney general.
Okay, so he's not authorized to practice law in Minnesota, according to the State Office of Lawyer Registration. Is there any provision in state law that says, you can run for attorney general but not be an attorney? I mean, is there another way around this for him?
Well, you don't have to be an attorney to run for attorney general in Minnesota. That's not a requirement under the law. But practically speaking, in terms of actually doing the responsibilities of the job, carrying out the functions of the office, you need to be an attorney because you need to be able to go into court, and you need to have have other attorneys have the ability to go into court in your name. And if you do that without a law license in Minnesota, that's the unauthorized practice of law, and that is actually a crime.
Have there ever been attorney general candidates that were not attorneys, or I should say, any elected?
I think there was one elected in the 30s, but I think that I believe, and I haven't looked into this, but I believe that probably the laws pertaining to the unauthorized practice of law and law licensure were likely different back then. So I think the situation has changed since that time. So it's a different situation now. But I think really the important thing here is that Keith Ellison hasn't been licensed to practice law for 6 years. He gave up his law license and went into Congress and presumably was going to do political things, and he's been focusing on those things for the last 6 years. All of a sudden he wants to come back and he wants to be the top attorney in the state, but he hasn't even been licensed to practice law for the past 6 years. That shows that he's just not serious about practicing law. And I don't think we want a person like that for the Attorney General's office here in Minnesota. He has said that he wants to use the office of the Attorney General to wage a political war against the president. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to obstruct President Trump's agenda. He wants to use the courts and the office of the Attorney General to transform the state. He wants to make policy from the office of the Attorney General, and that's completely inappropriate. To do those kinds of things, so it's not surprising that he doesn't have a law license, because he doesn't want to actually do the things that the Attorney General should be doing, like prosecuting welfare fraud and, backing up our county attorneys, making sure people are safe by making sure that our prosecutors have the resources they need to put people behind bars. Those are the kinds of things that he should be focusing on doing if he was going to be Attorney General. But to do those things, you need a law license.
Yeah, amazing. And by the way, this is but one of a long list of concerns that every Minnesotan ought to have about this race. Keith Ellison's record in the United States Congress is, very troubling. His radical connections in Minnesota are very troubling. What give me a top three on what you, besides this, obviously the guy not an attorney running for attorney general, that you want people to know.
No, absolutely. So that's very troubling. But in addition to that, I mean, his associations with Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. He worked for the Nation of Islam for 18 months. He met with Louis Farrakhan as recently as 2013, and Louis Farrakhan is about as evil and anti-Semitic a person as you can find anywhere, and that right there should be disqualifying in my book. Then look at Keith Ellison's views. The second, his views on immigration and open borders. He wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state. He has said that borders in general, in his words, create an injustice. So he doesn't believe in the concept of borders, and yet he wants to be the top law enforcement official in the state. I think that's very, very troubling. And then third, Keith Ellison has supported cop killers in the past on a number of different occasions. So Officer Jerry Hoff, Minneapolis police officer that was brutally murdered in the early 90s, Keith Ellison has spoken out in support of the folks that were charged and then ultimately convicted with the murder of Officer Hoff. He's also said favorable things in support of Sarah Jane Olson, Minnesota's homegrown terrorist. These things are just terrible, and you can't make this stuff up. Keith Ellison is just far too extreme for Minnesota.
I think I asked you this earlier. I don't remember if you answered or if I didn't remember the answer, but has he addressed the issue of not having a law license or having let his license expire?
No, he has not. No, that's another interesting thing. He hasn't said a word about it. So we'll see if he will address that, but he hasn't said a word about it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear his response on that. Yeah, trust me, I'm going to go back to school and get because he's already skipped like 180 hours of mandatory classes on what you need to keep your license, legal ethics, and diversity training. That he'd have to make that up before he got his license back, right? So this is no easy thing.
No, it's no easy thing. Up to 180 hours, I think. We don't know exactly how many hours he has missed, or if he's been making them up over time, or what the case may be. But he probably has a large number of hours left to do, and so it's not a small thing. But it really just shows that he's not a serious attorney, and we don't want somebody that we want someone who's a serious attorney, like myself. I am licensed to practice law, by the way. I have an active law license in Minnesota, and we want someone who practices law and who has a license to practice and is keeping up on developments in the legal system. That's the kind of person you want as Attorney General. You don't want a political hack who just wants to use the office to further a political agenda, and that's what Keith Ellison wants to do.
All right. Well, Doug, thanks for the update. Appreciate it. We'll keep following this race.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.